Welcome to the podcast of MotorWeek, television's original automotive magazine. MotorWeek is made possible by TireRack.com, WeatherTech, RockAuto.com, and State Farm. Here's your MotorWeek podcast host, John Davis.
Thank you, Alec Webb, and welcome everyone to MotorWeek podcast. Wait for it, number 200.
Yay!
We have reached the 200 mark, and it's very significant that sitting around our table in MotorWeek headquarters Studio C today is writer-producer Brian Robinson.
Hello, John.
Our online content coordinator, Greg Carlos.
I can't believe I was here at 100.
Yeah, and our video producer and editor and the producer of the podcast, Joe Ligo.
Hey, thanks, guys.
And Brian Robinson was the only one here that was at the table today that was here when we did the very first podcast way back on September 3rd, 2008, so a little over 10 years ago. I remember it very well. Podcasts were still relatively new at that point. Bob Mixter, who was the creator of the idea of the podcast, went to Michelle Parker, our publicist. They talked about it. They came in and twisted my arm, and I said, "Really?" And we started doing the podcast and haven't looked back, and it was a pretty fortuitous event because now I personally think we were the first of the mainstream automotive media that were doing podcasts, and we went on to do video podcasts for a while. And now virtually everybody does them. You can't hardly go into any podcast archive without that. But just to refresh everybody's memory, and Joe, jump in here anytime because you've actually looked at
I went back and listened to the first couple podcasts from back in the day. Gas,
$4 a gallon. So today, at least around here, it's about half that. Of course, at $4 a gallon, you talk a lot about fuel economy. We had just finished driving the hydrogen power Chevy Equinox. Wonder where that one is. The Cadillac CTS-V, which is going away in favor of SUVs. And I guess the only one that's still viable that we talked about then is the Honda Fit, which was new then. We also talked about the rising popularity of three-wheeled autocycles like the Can-Am Spyder. Wonder what they're still out there, but I think we're still sort of talking about them in the same, maybe in the future. We went around the table. We talked about everything that was pertinent to the day. So let me throw this out as our first. First, before we get that, there's one other person who was in on the very first podcast. And that is the gentleman that we talk about, his name a lot, but you never get to hear, and that's our audio engineer, Jim Bigwood. Jim, you back there in the control room?
Yes, I am.
Now, Jim was the audio engineer on the very first podcast. So what's your recollection, Jim?
I remember when you came to me in the summer of 2008 and said, "Hey, we're thinking about doing a podcast. Do you think you could do something like that?" And I thought back to my early days in broadcasting when I started in radio. And it was just a bunch of guys sitting around a table talking into microphones. Yeah. And I said to you, "Yeah, I think I can do this."
Yeah, it's gone full circle, hasn't it?
Yes.
I mean, that's exactly what we're doing. When I worked in my college radio station, that was kind of like you'd had the big table and the 4 or 5 microphones, and whatever you were going to talk about, you talked about it. It didn't really matter. It was formal.
But yeah, Jim's probably done the audio for more podcasts than anybody in this building.
Easily.
He's our go-to guy. But it's funny, I went back and listened to those early podcasts, and one thing that stuck out to me, everybody was really excited. We had just driven...
And we're not now, is that it?
No, we're still excited, but you were really excited. Everybody had just driven the new Volkswagen TDI that was 50 state legal. And we're all talking about how amazing it was. It met all these emission standards and all this stuff, and I just thought, man, if only we could... Nobody knew. How could you know?
Well, yeah, I mean, a lot has happened in 10 years, and maybe that's where we ought to start. Brian Robinson, last 10 years in this business, does anything jump out at you that you didn't think was going to happen or you did think was going to happen and it did?
Yeah, I think the general electrification of cars, the full EVs, is still slower to trickle out than what we were thinking at the time. Mm-hmm. They are, more and more cars or plug-ins are coming out, but maybe not as quickly as what I thought at the time. We were all small cars for a while. Now we're all big SUVs again.
Yeah.
So
Bigger the better.
Yeah, everything is cyclical.
Greg, you were a puppy at that point.
I was in college, man.
Yeah.
I was just looking at that. As far as car design, it's, in a decade didn't used to be that long of a time in car design, but now we're talking about total redesigns within half that time. Mm-hmm. So I'm thinking of cars, how we've gone from, we were still kind of in that nice flowing rounded edge phase.
That's
we were
right.
getting out of it. Now we're into like the super sharp angles. Look no further than Lexus,
Hack and
Nissan,
slash style.
Audi, all of them.
And I was a fan of the more rounded stuff, but I have started coming around on some of the more angular stuff, on Robinson's point, I feel like it's easy to think that the electrification has come out slow in cars, but if you do step back and look at all the electrification that is out there, it is quite a bit. I mean,
between hybrids and 48-volt electrical systems and of course the pure EVs. We've been talking about electric cars on MotorWeek since I think 1983 was the first one we ever did. So for 35 years, we've been saying it's coming, it's coming, it's coming. Now it finally is.
when do you think we'll say it's here? I mean, is it here?
What worries me is that right now you have certain governments in the world like the Chinese and to some extent the Europeans that are pushing towards all electric vehicles, and they're going to pretty much force people to buy them. That's not going to happen probably in this country. And so what's going to happen here, and I'm just talking about the U.S., is you've got all these cars that are going to be coming on the market for global consumption. And I'm afraid that Americans are going to either turn up their noses at them or they're going to have such poor resale value that it's going to spoil the march towards electrification, because there's a lot of situations like as your second car for a commuter car that they make superb sense for. Then the other thing is, of course, infrastructure. Can you imagine having enough charging stations to match the number of cars out there, say if they really started selling at 1 million a year? I don't see plans for that. So I think all of that could sour the American appetite, and you may go from a lot of them coming out in the next few years to where there'd be some form of retrenchment. Maybe you'd have electrified, more hybrids, but not as many plug-ins.
We'll have to cover that in the next 10 years of podcasting.
I'm going to answer that question myself, and then Joe, I'll let you have a go at it. I didn't think that SUVs would take over the market. I thought they were a growing section, but really sedans collapsed within the last 3 years. It was just like one day they were selling well, and the next month, it was actually July or June of like 3 years ago, they just went away. And I didn't think that was going to happen. But I think that if you ask me what was the biggest change in automobiles in 10 years, I think it has to be all the advanced safety systems. All the stuff that's been made possible by this march towards autonomous vehicles, which is another thing that's probably not going to come as quick as a lot of people would want. But the automatic braking, the blind spot monitoring, the rear cross traffic alert.
Cameras on every side
Cameras
of the car.
Everywhere, the 360. When I saw Nissan took us to a lab and showed us their 360 camera routine, we thought, why do you need that? One in the back is enough. Well, guess what?
Now every car has
Now it's like you almost, how quickly we get used to that stuff too.
Yeah. So technology has certainly marched forward. Joe.
Now,
I should say this going in. Joe is our classic car guru. So
stuck in the past.
Well, I'm not so sure of that.
But I love looking back on car history. The big thing I think of is just all the corporate shakeups. I mean, 2008 was the height of the big bailouts, and Chrysler was at death's door, and
as was GM.
And I don't think Tesla had even built a single car yet.
I think they had the Roadster. I think maybe.
They were struggling to get that into production. So just the amount of corporate changes. I mean, we still had Saturn and Mercury and Pontiac back then, and now in Hummer and Saab. So just the corporate shakeups and stuff. It's crazy to think about how much that stuff has changed.
Do you think that's going to continue?
I don't know. I mean, with Nissan Renault's situation with their CEO guy getting booted, I mean, I think in Ford and Volkswagen partnering up on stuff, I think there's going to be lots of corporate shakeups in the future. And then with China, it's a whole other story. But, I mean, we could spend the whole podcast predicting the future and still get it wrong.
Jim, are you still there?
Yes, I am.
All right. What's
Thank goodness.
what's the biggest change in automobiledom that you have seen that affects you as a consumer? And I have to say that Jim he produces the audio for a lot of shows here, and so he's not just stuck in gear with us.
I would probably say the rise of hybrids out there. There was not as many on the roads then.
And the fact that almost everybody now, when they launch a new model, they either say we've got one coming or we've got one here as
Right,
well.
a hybrid version will be on sale soon.
Well, I predicted back then that if you really looked at the whole electrification thing, a hybrid like a Prius or whatever you want to say, today maybe a plug-in hybrid, makes the most sense because you don't need special infrastructure. So thank you all. That was fun. Looking back over 200 podcasts and 10 plus years, a lot has changed, and we hope you'll all stick around with us as we go ahead and heading towards that 300 mark. I don't think it'll take us 5 years to get there, but who knows? Anyway, we do have some current events that we want to talk about, some vehicles that we've either just finished testing or actually have in our shop right now. We're going to start with one we recently had down at our winter testing track, Rolling Road Raceway down in Savannah, Georgia. That's the revamped Acura NSX for 2019. In case you are not up to speed on it, 3.5-liter V6 hybrid. It's got 2 electric motors in front and one in the back. It's got a 9-speed twin-clutch transmission, 0 to 60 in 3.1 seconds. Okay. I've got both Brian and Greg that drove the car extensively at the track. What did you think?
Relatively minor updates as far as it goes, but it's only been out for 2 years. So basically, the standard tires are upgraded. Although we didn't have those, we had the upgraded Pirellis anyway, and some software updates. They claim it's 2 seconds quicker around their test track.
That's a lot.
The NSX, I mean, it's still the same deal. It goes about its business with robotic precision, and sometimes you don't feel like you're in total control of it, but it still slices around the track like nothing else, that's for sure.
I think it was the fastest. I think I drove that car the fastest I've ever driven any car the first time I got in, and it was at a racetrack out on the West Coast. And I've never driven a car that made you feel like you were that good of driver. It's like, wow, I think I'm Pernelli Jones here, but Pernelli Jones, sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah.
Pernelli Jones.
Actually, I was about to say this, essentially the same thing. You get up to speed very quickly in that car. It's easy to drive it fast, extremely well balanced. Like Brian said, there's a ton of electronics going on. If you've driven a lot of cars, you can kind of sense what's going on. But if you just hop in this thing and you're a casual driver, you're like, wow, this is incredible. I can do anything I want. It's weird. I think I fell kind of victim to a lot of other people's opinions, souring mine on the NSX because I don't know why.
There's a lot of supercar people out there that have hated the car from day one.
and I don't know why I went in thinking I'm just not going to like it, and then I really sat down and thought about it, and I think it was a lot of just other people and maybe fans who haven't driven the car who were just hating on it because
Peer
it's
pressure.
new. Right. But driving it's a different story. Now I will say, if you're into stuff like engine sound, if you're on the outside of the car, you're going to probably be disappointed. But on the inside, and Robinson can attest to it, it sounds
great.
good.
Yeah,
It's all
artificial,
manufactured,
but,
you know that, but it sounds so great. You get over it pretty
Everybody
quick.
says it sounds better inside the car than
Well,
out.
it does.
And, I was in control of the flags at Roebling when it was doing laps, and I'd hear it come by, and I thought, man, that is such a disappointing engine note. But then everybody who got out of it is like, man, that thing sounds great inside. So I guess it's definitely for the driver, not for the passerby.
It's so capable though, and just like Greg was saying, just instantly start pushing it. But I found myself like not paying attention to stuff because it's just so easy to drive. It's like you're in a Lexus tooling down to the mall or whatever, and then you're like realize you're coming up on a corner, and it's like wow, but all the electronics
at triple-digit
kick
speeds
in,
and like, whoa.
you scoot right through like nothing happened.
The Acura NSX, and a relative bargain now with so much of the stuff that used to be optional standard, $160,000. That's a lot of money for me, but it's not a lot of money for somebody in that market. So, Okay, let's move on to something a little less pricey. The 2019 Lexus UX. This is a subcompact Lexus SUV, the first time they've put their toe into this market. A 2-liter, normally aspirated engine, 169 horsepower. They also have a hybrid version. It's an urban crossover without any question. So, those of you that have had a chance to drive it so far, I've sat in it. I've been around it. I was at the auto show when they unveiled it. Strikes me as kind of small for me, but what do you think about the market it's aimed at?
This is like a Buick Encore size kind of thing, but
And
maybe a little
Chevy
more
Trax.
luxurious.
Yeah, it's based on the Toyota CHR, which you can only get as front-wheel drive.
It was very, very bare bones.
Yeah, this one you can get all-wheel drive, but only if you get the hybrid, where you get the Toyota rear electric motor all-wheel drive. If you remember the CT200H Lexus, this is basically a new version of that, but since people don't buy hatchbacks, they do buy SUVs. Then that's what it is.
Is it about the same size or is it a little bit smaller?
Then the CT or the CHR?
The CT.
I would say it's about the same size space-wise inside, but it's jacked up a little bit.
Taller,
But
square.
even still, it doesn't ride all that high. And I noticed that cleaning off snow yesterday. I cleaned off my wife's CX-9, and then I turned around to go clean off the UX, and it's
lower.
like, I'm
It's
like
like
looking down
the
at it.
BMW X1,
Yeah.
sort of, as
But
far as height.
Yeah, I liked it. I drove it a lot this weekend, and once you get yourself in, it's small. It's not for everybody. But I had a great time in the hybrid. I thought it rode well. Fuel economy was okay for me, but it was also very cold, and I let it run sometimes. So I noticed the engine was on a lot more than other hybrids. But a comfortable cruiser, it's all right. So there's fake audio
talk
coming
about that,
back.
'cause
It's
I didn't
so
even know that.
obvious.
And it's a little bit annoying once you hear it for the first time. But here's something even a little bit more silly. Is I took it to the track, and so when you take off, you hear the natural engine noise. But then at about 30 to 40 miles per hour, then you hear a very obvious computer-generated engine sound come through the speakers. And what's even worse is this thing has a CVT, which does not shift gears. The engine sound coming through the speakers shifts gears.
Oh, come on.
But I'm looking at the tack, and it's not moving at all.
Oh, come on. That's just insulting your intelligence
Yeah,
at that
so-
point. When I was driving it on the street, I was playing around with the different drive modes, eco mode or whatever. And as soon as I put it into sport mode, I'm like, this is not the end. I was coasting. I was going downhill. And you put it in sport mode, and the speakers just start blasting fake engine noise into the cabin.
I don't know if that's just like an F Sport thing, but that's what we have. And yeah, they could probably dial that back a little bit. But I'll be honest, I really did enjoy driving it for the weekend.
It was really designed as much for American city streets that are often clogged as it was for going out on a European country road, which is traditionally about a lane and a half at most wide and pretty twisty with no markings. So I really felt, and they debuted it in Europe first, that this was really more aimed at sort of capturing a slice of the growing SUV market in Europe, which tends to be much smaller and more price conscious.
It felt very
than it is
Euro.
here. And so I think in that aspect, from everything that I've seen, I think they've actually they've done a good job of making the F Sport sporty instead of just a nameplate. I think Brian even commented about that. But back seat's kind of tiny, but it's kind of a two-person car.
And despite the CVT, it does have one of the better CVTs out there. It does have their step. I guess they kind of have artificial steps in it or something.
10-speed, 10 steps, right, Brian?
Yep.
Yeah.
So it's fun to drive.
So if you're looking for something in that line, a subcompact luxury SUV, you want something a little nicer than a Trax, and for that matter, a Buick Encore. I think it's a very viable engine. I like it. One aspect I like better than the Encore is at least it's got a 4-cylinder. Mm-hmm. So, anywho, that is that. We also, sort of in a way, at the other end of the spectrum, although it's a little standout on its own, is the 2019 Chevrolet Blazer. Here is a 5-passenger SUV bringing back the Blazer name. It is larger than an Equinox, smaller than a Traverse. It looks like really neither. It looks a lot like a Camaro, a very stylized, boxy, tall Camaro.
Yeah.
My first impression was, why? But I have to tell you, I really like driving it.
Yeah, it's similar. When I heard they were bringing the Blazer back, I just wrongfully assumed that it would be based on the Colorado, like rear-wheel drive. I was like super jazzed about that. I'm like,
kind of like
super jazzed.
Yeah,
kind of like the new Bronco,
just like the new Bronco.
Yeah.
Well, before, I want to see what Super Jazz Robinson is.
Well, it didn't happen, so you can't see it. So, but then once we saw the thing, realized it's on the same chassis as the Acadia and Traverse and all that, front-wheel drive.
It's a crossover.
I got over pretty quickly though. When you see it, like you say, it looks like the whole front end straight off the Camaro. It sits low, it looks aggressive, and it drives really nice too. So, and no one wants rear-wheel drive truck-like things anymore anyway. So,
well, I think we're all going to be sitting there watching to see how Ford does with the new Explorer. There, except for towing, I'm not sure what the advantage is. I'd like to call out the fact that it's got a very good voice recognition system in it. Surprising. We've been talking a lot about some of the more advanced systems and how well some of them work. And here's, basically a mainstream brand, and most things that you threw at it that were just, rudimentary, they worked very well. So I thought it did.
Yeah. I guess it's kind of like a 2 bird, 1 stone situation for Chevrolet because, as we know, and this is the thing amongst luxury manufacturers, is trying to fill every possible niche. Mm-hmm. So they are like slipping something in there that we wouldn't necessarily think would work, but between Equinox and Traverse, and they get to bring back the Blazer name. So
we were talking in the office about what this competes against, and I said I think it competes against the Nissan Murano. But do you know what it's aimed at?
When we were having that conversation, I said the Edge, specifically the ST, the Ford Edge, because they redone that, and then there's an RS version of the Blazer. A lot sportier, clearly aimed right at the Edge.
But do you know what Chevy says? Chevy says they're looking at luring customers away from the Grand Cherokee.
That's not going to happen.
I don't think so either.
No.
Yeah.
I mean, I shouldn't say it's not going to happen. They're not going to be coming in droves because
that's a whole different animal.
Yeah, they want the frame and rear wheel drive.
Yeah.
I don't know. Whenever I wondered why they chose the name Blazer, because when people like me think of Blazer, I think of like rusted out S10 Blazers with mismatched doors. Like I grew up with a lot of
there
those.
There are other people out there that remember them fondly, Joe.
So I'm, but seeing is believing. I think if they kind of try to market it as a 4-door Camaro, the styling is there. I think that they could go somewhere with that.
The ride and handling is there too. Actually, I thought it was really kind of athletic.
And you know what else is there that we often don't talk about, at least the public doesn't, is quality. Do you realize the recent J.D. Power dependability survey that looks at 3 years worth of dependable vehicles? They now rate Chevrolet as 4th and Buick 5th, and they're behind Lexus, Porsche, and Toyota.
Chevy.
Yeah. Chevy
I'm sure we'll see.
I'm sure we'll see that
lots of commercials. Yeah. We'll see lots of commercials.
That's a Chevy?
That's a Chevy?
Oh, wait, I'm sorry. That's Buick. Sorry.
No. You're right. All right. Thanks very much, guys. Now let's move on to our viewer question for today. This is a pretty good one. We were sort of alluding to this earlier. I just watched a feature on MotorWeek on alternative fuel stations, places to basically put whatever you're running besides gasoline in it. Once you reach a station, how do you cool your heels while waiting for electric vehicles like Volt, Tesla, or others to recharge? What do you do for that hour to get if you've got a fast charge station?
Well, on the subject of all alternative fuel stations, stuff like hydrogen and biofuels and stuff, I mean, they're as quick as gas.
Exactly.
Well, I was
nominally, but not quite as quick. But we're not talking about like minutes difference.
I was going to say you drove the hydrogen.
Yeah, they claim that it's as quick as gas, but it's not.
No.
Okay. It takes a little more care, and the nozzles are more complicated.
Yeah, but we're not talking about waiting an hour for
a battery.
75% battery charge.
I'll tell you, the couple of times I've seen people waiting, they were just sitting in their cars checking their emails on their tablets.
YouTube kills time.
Yeah.
Or I'm not sure what I don't know if that's a line from the that Scriv wrote into that piece. I'm not sure. I'm not familiar with
cool
the
your
piece.
heels?
Yeah.
No,
But
I think that just means what do
just
you do to
waiting.
keep yourself busy?
Most of them, especially on interstates, are at a rest area, just where you can go hang out, have a picnic, go to a restaurant, and get something to eat.
Get an Auntie Anne's pretzel.
Yeah.
I looked on the website to see if there was any kind of credentials to have one, like if you had to have a gas station nearby or some sort of like shopping center to do anything. It didn't seem like it,
No,
and
there's
some of
not.
the shots that we got looked like they were more industrial parks than like actual
A lot of
truck
grocery
stops.
stores and drugstores have them, and restaurants and motels, but think about it. Say we were going down from our home in Owings Mills to Savannah, Georgia. It's 600 miles to Roebling Roads. That would probably be 2 stops, so it would add at least 2 hours to your trip if you found the right charging station. Okay, one of them you can probably eat. Maybe both of them you eat. I mean, that's one of the few things besides just basically playing with a tablet or a phone. So I think it's an issue. I really do.
I know Tesla has deliberately tried to locate their stuff near areas to eat or relax or do stuff. But I know Porsche, working on their fast charging stuff, and Volkswagen, they're trying to get it down to like 15 minutes to do a 80% charge. So I think that's where you'll really see it become less of an issue. Is once you can get down from 30 minutes to 15 minutes to get your battery mostly charged. That's when it's less.
Well,
of
the
an issue.
goal is for people like Dyson, who does the vacuum cleaners. He's developing his car is going to have a digital battery, and it will be instantaneous. You basically plug it in, it's recharged. So we'll see if that happens. And supposedly he's had some success so far.
The bigger issue, and this might even sneak into a rant or rave, which, congratulations on the 200th podcast. I've never actually had a rant or a rave. But we mentioned
another
earlier,
first for today.
We mentioned earlier the lack of full EVs, but a lot more plug-in hybrids. So at least in our area where I live, there's like one shopping center with charging stations. It has 2 chargers. And if you're in a full EV, and if I'm planning on sneaking in there and getting a charge, almost every time I go there, there's somebody with a plug-in hybrid.
Fusion Energy.
A Fusion Energy, or a Toyota Prius plug-in or whatever, who doesn't need to use it, and they're both sitting there charging. And, so if you get a full EV, you roll into a charging station, and they're all full, I'm not sure what you do with that.
That's a real good point.
Do you think they'll switch it to like you have to be a full EV to use this spot, and then if you're not, you get cast off
my guess
with all
is-
those
That would make
expectant
sense for
mothers
sure,
and
yeah.
stuff like that?
My guess is that the rapid charging, the stuff that's over 400 volts or whatever, my guess is that plug-ins won't have they won't have a fast charging plug on
won't
a
really
plug-in
need it.
hybrid. They'll
Well-
probably limit them to 240 or 220 or whatever.
But their battery is so small, it wouldn't take that long anyway at that point.
Right. And then you wind up with someone in a restaurant for 40 minutes while their, Fusion Energy has been done charging for half an hour already, and you're just sitting there waiting.
I'm sure if we sat and thought about this, we could find out a lot more problems with this. But this is all what I think when we do Podcast 300, we may have some answers.
I mean, if you're charging your Tesla, I'm sure you could just find somebody and talk about your Tesla for an hour.
The Tesla forums are filled with charging etiquette. It's a whole world that
Yeah, but
that
what do they?
are.
All right, but what do they do about the non-Tesla owner who now can buy an adapter and use their station?
Like an
I
illegal
know quite a
Chinese
few of
adapter
them.
and stuff.
Yeah, it's somebody
They'll
in
build a wall
California,
around
I
their
think,
chargers at
developed
some
it.
point.
I'm sure that Tesla is a lot like Apple in that they'll find a way to release a new plug that you have to buy,
Their car
special access to use,
Or it'll just detect the adapter and then not let it charge.
and eject you.
Yeah, they'll eject you. All right, let's move on. We're up to our rant raves. Brian, do you actually have one?
Oh, that was it. It was
That
the
was a
mild.
good one.
It
That was a
counts.
good one.
It
I like
counts.
that one.
Feel free if someone's got something better to chime in.
Mine is annoying, and it has nothing to do with aggression. Usually when I'm talking about bad driving behaviors, I'm talking about somebody being overly aggressive and just annoying the bejeebies out of me. But I just did a 1,200-mile up and down the East Coast run, and I was in a car, not an SUV, low to the ground, fairly innocuous. And I was struck by the number of people that tailgate both in the city and the highways, and these are not people that want you to get out of the way. it seems to be increasingly just a normal way of driving because when you get over, they don't pass.
Yeah, so like you say you're in the right lane,
Right.
and then they're like right up on you when the left lane is completely open to
Right.
move around.
Right.
They just don't.
Or you pull over and they sit there, so now they're in your blind spot.
Right.
And I give them usually about 20 seconds, and then I just nail it to get the heck
Yeah.
away from them.
That's what I like to envision. John Davis. Just
I
full throttle.
I fully believe in using the accelerator, but 90 seconds is all it takes. 90 feet rather. You travel 90 feet in 1 second at 60 miles an hour. That's 3 car lengths basically plus. So if the person behind you is 1 second late in hitting the brakes, if you hit the brakes, they're not just in your rear; they're ahead of you.
Yeah.
So is it people aren't getting trained? Is no one paying attention? It just seems to be prevalent. And it doesn't even seem to be age specific.
People don't even, they just don't pay attention. I'm not sure if they teach it well or not, but even on 2-lane roads, you'll see at nighttime people riding right on people's tails in 2-lane roads. And I'm like, wow, that's...
All it takes is one deer to cause like
Sure.
a 3-car pileup.
Yeah.
Or to put you in in traction for the rest of your life. So anyway, if you catch yourself maybe being a little too close so that you can't see the taillights of the car ahead of you, back off a little bit. After all, you're not only protecting yourself, you're basically maybe keeping your insurance rates reasonably low and hopefully not causing somebody else lots of damage and injury. Okay. Is that it? Anybody have anything else they want to throw in? 200?
I'm good.
Joe?
Here's to the next
Jim
200.
Bigwood, any closing comment?
May we be fortunate enough to record 200 more.
All right. Well, we wrap up MotorWeek podcast number 200. I want to thank everybody, Brian Robinson, Greg Carlos, Joe Ligo, Jim Bigwood for being a part of this momentous occasion. And I mentioned earlier our podcast creator, Bob Mixter, and of course, Jim back there making us all sound halfway literate. We hope that you have a chance to listen to more of our podcasts and to actually watch MotorWeek on your public television stations around the country and also on the Motor Trend cable network. If you're wondering where to watch us, you can go to our website, motorweek.org, do the pull down at the top, put in your zip code or your city, and find out what public television station is airing us near you and when. Anything else, Greg? Greg's our social media guru.
Keep watching our retro reviews.
Yeah.
Watch us on YouTube. Keep basically following us on Twitter and Facebook. If you are out there interested in cars, we're there to help. I'm John Davis. For all of us at MotorWeek, thanks very much for joining us, and we'll talk to you soon.
You've been listening to the podcast of MotorWeek, television's original automotive magazine. MotorWeek is made possible by TireRack.com, WeatherTech, RockAuto.com, and State Farm. For additional information on podcasts, videos, and showtimes, visit our website at motorweek.org. And watch MotorWeek, television's longest-running automotive magazine series each week on your local PBS station.